Maybe, Bug, you wanna maybe we can walk out like to the middle of the bottom fields?
Yeah.
And I can give you guys just like a general orientation on what's going on here. Breadtree is a farm and food company. We've been doing this work since 2018, 2019, starting on a lease at Otter Creek Farm. This field is like a 50-50 mix of hybrid chestnuts and yellowbud and hybrid hickories. So that's basically chestnuts as a carbohydrate, as like a starch or a flour crop, and hickory as an oil crop. So hickory is a native hardwood that's a keystone of eastern forests. Like we all have, anyone who lives around here definitely like sees yellowbud hickories all the time. It's sometimes called smooth bark hickory here, but you'll start once you know what you're looking at, you'll see them everywhere.
We have so few people we could taste oil at the end of this if
anyone
wants to.
You guys want to try it?
Hickory oil.
Yeah, it's like an olive oil substitute, and this is a relatively new idea. There's a handful of people in the country who, starting with Sam Thayer, who's an author and forager, who's like probably the most knowledgeable person about wild foods in the country, has been like really recognized this potential of the yellowbud hickory as an oil crop, and kind of like tried to convince people for a long time, and people didn't really listen. And then like a handful of people started to listen, who include our friend and colleague Jesse Markson and Eric Cornell, who run the Yellowbud Farm Nursery in Northfield, Massachusetts, and they've started to do R&D on the actual post-harvest processing of nuts into oil, and do national genetics exploration, looking for the exceptional parents that can form kind of like the first generation of orchard genetics. So it's like you can kind of imagine like if you were in Europe like 5,000 years ago and like nobody knew that the olive was a useful food, and all the literature said like this is a garbage tree that even wildlife doesn't eat. Yeah, even squirrels find it distasteful, kind of thing.
Is hickory a good substitute for olive oil?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's nutritionally.
It's also high smoke point oil.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of culinary research around roasting the nut. It's like the least commercially explored food, right? There's like every level of testing around how long should you roast nuts for? Is it better to roast them filtered versus unfiltered? Even a lot of the pressing that's being done is at a really small scale, so there's like a ton of work around figuring out how to press.
It's kind of like has a high smoke point like avocado oil, but has like a very similar nutrient profile as olive oil, and tastes kind of like liquid pecans, and very importantly grows here, which none of those other oils do. And we don't have in this region, any plant-based oil production besides sunflower, like at a very marginal scale. Basically, it's a staple, important part of a diet, and we don't have it here. So. There's a lot of buildings in the Northeast and along the eastern seaboard that are framed in chestnut, and a lot of other coffins and railroad ties and telephone poles. Like a lot of things were being done with chestnut, and you see that same pattern basically in all the other places in the world where chestnuts have been. Basically everywhere where chestnut grows, it's a keystone part of the ecology and the economy. So the other places where chestnuts grow besides historically here are Europe, all around the Mediterranean, like into Turkey and Northern Africa, and East Asia, Japan, China, and Korea. So there's kind of like, there was the American chestnut tree in North America, the sativa European chestnut tree around the Mediterranean, and then the Chinese and Japanese chestnut tree in East Asia. And in the time since the blight came to the States and rendered the American chestnut basically extinct, there have been a couple of different lineages of work and thought focused on restoring chestnuts to the landscape. And a lot of people are familiar with the American Chestnut Foundation and a lot of kind of like satellites of that research effort, which is focused on restoring American chestnuts-ish to the forest. It's focused on forest restoration, right? Basically, this is about, chestnuts for conservation, forest restoration, and animal habitat versus chestnuts as a food source and important part of potential future agriculture for this region. See, like, we started experimenting with including trees in the paddock here, and it's just fun. With sheep, it's like you can just include trees in the paddock, which creates a lot. It's a lot less stressful to manage. It's from the kind of perspective of like the symbiosis that you're trying to create. It's ideal if we don't have to physically separate the animals from the trees. Obviously, at this stage, the trees are not giving the animals any meaningful shade, but like in the orchard that Brad and Liz are grazing in, there's meaningful shade now being produced by the trees. Mature, or like probably, I don't know, 40 or 50 year old, not all the way mature, yellow bud hickory tree. Trees have like those thick witch fingers. The twigs are really thick, and they have opposite branching.
They also have, you'll see, once you see what their bud looks like, which is this beautiful yellow, like beak almost, you'll start noticing them on the forest floor coming up because their buds are so distinctive. Like basically only witch hazel kind of looks a little like them.
Yeah, winter especially.
They're like bright yellow.
Bright yellow.
Yeah. So these trees actually can get a lot bigger than chestnut trees. Like a mature yellow bud hickory or hybrid yellow bud hickory, that would be like yellow bud by shagbark is one of the kinds of hybrids that we're planting some seedlings of. They could be like as big as the biggest oak trees you've ever seen. They can be like 150 feet tall. So there's a potential where you could imagine like huge overstory trees that are producing an oil crop with chestnut trees that are maybe like as big as the biggest apple trees you've ever seen, as kind of like a mid canopy. That's actually that's under the spaced out and under the emergent layer. One of the major predators that we're dealing with young tree establishment is Japanese beetles, which everybody's familiar with as like a garden pest. So Japanese beetles, it turns out, I don't think any of us knew this before we found out about this, are way happier living in a hayfield than like their reproductive cycle is like a hayfield is like God's gift to Japanese beetles. And they don't eat grass. They only eat broadleaf plants, leaves. So in a hayfield, they don't have other things to chew on, and they have ideal conditions for them to reproduce. In a field like this, where there's a lot of forb diversity and other types of broadleaf plants, it's less and where we're not cutting it constantly short, it's less conducive to their reproduction, and they have a lot more else to eat. So like in this field, we sort of accidentally had a natural experiment where like the Japanese beetle defoliation in the bottom part of this field where there's no blue flowers compared to the upper part was like 10 to 1. Like huge difference in pest pressure, where like in the bottom it's a real problem that we're having to manage like with organic pesticides basically, and in the upper portion it's totally like in balance, or like it's the damage is acceptable, let's say, which is like what we're going for in an organic system. It's like we're not going for total elimination of pests, we're just going for, can we have it in enough balance that, you know, the plants can do what they need to do.
We don't want to have everything mowed all at once, and have like basically a ecological desert for a couple of weeks. Like we want to do it in a patchy way. So letting plants get to different maturities in different parts of the soil, and you know, as plants go through their life cycle, they have different. We're doing it in a heterogeneous way, and just like allowing the land to express itself, so that if you weren't in tune with what's going on, then it might actually look like crazy.
Yeah, I think for a lot of
but
it just looks
but actually the management's pretty simple, and I would say replicable.
So basically with fresh chestnuts, you know, coming in from the field, they need to go through certain processes in order to actually be saleable. So there's going to be, like most of what we're going to be doing here is just going to be processing fresh chestnuts into a form where it can actually be sold. So that's like, you know, yeah, exactly, as a fresh nut. So that's like separate, you know, in the first 5 years. I think over probably like the second decade of our food business, flour will be a much more important part of it. Basically, fresh nuts need to, you know, they need to get separated from sticks and stones and anything else that's not a chestnut. They need to get separated into different sizes. They need to get what we call a hot water bath, which is basically like an organic way to sterilize them and manage the tiny microscopic eggs of what would otherwise turn into weevil grubs in some cases. You know, like that's like the same grubs that are in acorns affect chestnuts, and if you don't do anything to manage that, then some customers are going to have maggots in their chestnuts, which most people don't like.
Although when we were in Italy, the Italians don't hot water bath any of their nuts that go to flour, and they were just like, what? It's all just getting ground up.
Yeah.
It's protein.
He just was like, carne. The chestnut industry right now is a multi-billion-dollar global industry, mostly in the Mediterranean and in China. Just like basically, the eastern United States is the only ecologically suitable place where there is not already a mature chestnut industry, and it's just because the native chestnut happened to get wiped out. So we're just like in a recovery period. So basically, as a result of the fact that there's not a lot of chestnut production in the country and it's very difficult to import them, there's really very limited access to like good quality, certainly organic chestnuts. There's like barely any.